Let's do work. I dropped the fuel tank. There it is. It's been cleaned out twice, flushed out, still crap in it. Couple more flushes of the fuel tank and this thing will be sparkling like brand new. Now, let's talk about coolers. Oil cooler installed. Oil outlet housing with thermostat. Just install like that. AN10 lines go into the oil cooler. Power steering cooler. Installed with lines ready to go to the rack. And then finally the transmission cooler. Let's get that guy installed. So looking at this aluminum cooler, you'll see that they already came supplied with AN10 fittings. Basically, it's a MPT on the bottom with an AN fitting on the top, going to an AN10 size, which is pretty large actually, and actually it's too large. Why? Because the smallest orifice in the transmission cooler lines is this guy. You can see that right there. It's way, way smaller than anything that the AN10 can give it. So what we're gonna be doing, in order to make things slimmer in the application of our installation, we're gonna do away with this and we're gonna be using a aluminum weld-on bung. It's gonna go right in there. If we were to just screw this on just like that, you'll see the installation is a lot slicker, a lot smaller, more compact, and a lot easier for us to route our AN6 lines. They're gonna be going to our AN6 size diameter tubing on the transmission. Now that these puppies are all welded up, let's install it. Cooler is installed and plenty of lines, as you can see, to route wherever I need. In fact, we're going to be taking those lines when we're going down the passenger side of the car and across through right here to the transmission. Unfortunately, the one bracket that I had installed is not enough and it is still floppy, so we need to add a little bit more rigidity by installing a second bracket on the top side here, right above. There's another bracket, well, not a bracket, but steel mounting plate on the top of this aluminum radiator that we're going to be able to weld some more structure right to the top or the side. So let's take a look and see what we can do to rigidicize our trans bracket. And that's it, guys. All three coolers are now installed onto the frame. We have our power steering cooler that's gonna have its two lines going to the rack and the pump. We have our oil cooler right here that has its two lines that are gonna be coming out, down, around, and up. And then we have our transmission cooler, which needed to be braced up significantly. In fact, we needed to put another brace from the oil cooler to the trans cooler so that it holds true. And look at this, man, this is really good. We have our AN6 fittings here that can be rotated anywhere we want, and they're gonna end up going, they're gonna be coming around and down through a hole over there. Now it leaves room for a nice big condenser and a fan. So we're gonna be in good shape with all that. We're gonna do AC in another episode, but for now, all we need to do is work on all the plumbing, which is really the fun part. Now that we've got the three coolers in place, now we need to divorce the drivetrain from the chassis. Why? Because in order to work on the transmission lines, in order to get to the transmission lines to the cooler, we need to get to the side of the transmission. We can't do that here. We're also gonna work on the clutch line, and we're also gonna take a look at finishing up our steering column and fully welding that up as well, amongst a couple of other things while we're in there. First, what I plan to do is just basically drop the drivetrain down on the piece of wood. And in order to do that, I needed to disconnect our tie rods, our suspension components, so that this basically sits free in the air. We also needed to remove the steering column here, so the steering rack is disconnected from the column. And then finally, when it's actually on the wooden sawhorse, we get to remove these 13mm bolts. That drops that part down. The one other thing that we need to remove before we finally bring the car back up and leave the drivetrain sitting on the wood is the shifter. We're gonna do that when the car is back down so we can access the shifter and remove the shift bushing from the chassis connection up top. So you might say that the effort to remove the drivetrain is complicated. With a lift, it's actually not that bad. And if you design the system, it's actually not bad at all. Now, rest assured, I'm gonna be taking this drivetrain out a number of more times in order to fine tune everything and make sure that the fitment is spot on. But in this round, I need to go to the next step and prep this engine for a first start. And that means getting the accessories on the front and getting the harness installed as well, and start making the electrical connections that are necessary to the car in order to get that key to start the engine. So just about everything is fitted up here, and I just mocked up the power steering ICT setup here only because I can't actually put it in when I install the car since the frame rails are too narrow. I have to install this after the engine's back in the car. But I took a look at the existing belt, which would normally run just like this with the tensioner here loosening in order to get that over the crank. We need a custom belt. I need to call up ICT to get a custom size serpentine belt that is going to end up going underneath here. It's going to go up over the power steering pulley, back through this idler, and then down to the main crank. And that's in order to get our hydraulic power steering. So now that I've gotten everything here, I technically need to start looking at other things while the engine is out. And I wanted to talk really quick about the clutch line. So the clutch slave cylinder on the TR6060 is on the passenger side. What that means is that I need to take, this is the clutch line that I cut off during the removal of the engine. This guy technically goes around, and it comes around as well on the Camaro. So I'm gonna replace this line with a new one, and I'm gonna cut it at a convenient location that allows me to hook up to the hydraulic system on the master cylinder on the clutch setup. So that really is all I need to do for the clutch, and bleeding it should be quite simple. There's a bleeder right here, and all you have to do is just attach your hose to that. Access might be difficult when it's in the car, but I did want to at least make some sort of accommodation for that now, knowing that it needs to be done. And of course, before we start to install the loom again, I wanted to talk about the transmission cooling lines. One is on this side and one is on the other side. On this side, we need to go down and then under. So I want to go under right around here, and I think that maybe using this 90 degree is going to be the best way in order to achieve that. So for this side, I'm going to plan on using a weld-in steel bung with a 90 degree AN6 fitting, and it's going to end up going underneath the transmission just like that. It's going to circle around and go that way. And this side's going to work out really well too. I'm going to use the stock hard line on that output. It's going to come straight across, lay right over the front subframe, which is going to be nice because it's going to have a nice clamp there to hold it into place. Remember, we're going to have the other AN6 line from the other side coming through as well. So both of these guys are going to end up running parallel to each other and coming up and around and into the transmission cooler, which, by the way, is also AN6. So we're going to have AN6 to AN6 lines going all the way across. So the transmission lines, I think we got that pretty sorted out. So now that we've talked about the transmission lines, we've talked about the clutch line and what we're going to do there. Now it's time to talk about the harness and start laying that harness over the engine and reinstalling it as it was before. So the harness is basically fully installed, even the transmission side. Oxygen sensor here, both oxygen sensors. All of the sensors for the TR6060 are now installed. There are two things that I do have a concern with though, after having installed everything and figuring out where everything lies. And the first thing is the Holley oil pan did not come with an oil dipstick. So I looked at using the factory one, and it seems like it could fit, right? It circumvents the exhaust downpipes and it comes up like this, and it will probably work. I need to check two things on that. First, is that what it's intended to do? Two, it comes out pretty easily, so is that a problem? Even though it does an O-ring in there, and there is a bit of a pressure. And number three, is the oil level still correct? Because I'm using a different oil pan and the capacity is different, and I'm also using an oil cooler, so that's going to take up some volume as well. So I need to check on those things. The second thing I also need to check up on is that there is no oil pressure switch for the Holley oil pan. On the existing stock oil pan, you can see that there was, well, not here, but on the original oil pan, there is a spot for a oil pressure switch. That is not resident here. The wiring obviously makes the accommodations for it, but the switch bung does not exist here, so I gotta look that up too. So now that we've got a lot of this sorted out, we have our action items to go forward with, let's start taking a look at fuel on the Camaro. So there's two options for fuel. Either we can go and get the fuel pump through eBay, and we can get the fuel pump control module through eBay and all the connectors and everything like that, or we can take a visit to our old friend, the original Camaro from which this drivetrain came, and see if we can fish it out from there directly.